Many men that I know, since I work with them clinically, are not liberated. They are constrained, they're confined, they are frustrated, they are depressed, they're anxious, they're angry, they're resentful. Many of them have just basically checked out. And I think it's a tragedy because these men have tremendous potential.
All right, welcome everybody. So it's the Shaman coming at you here, and this is another wonderful Liberated Man podcast show. I've got my good friend and ally Mark McDonald here. Thanks for being on the show today.
Good to see you again, Shae.
So Mark is a clinical psychologist. He's also been in the field of, let's say, like social reflection and commentary for quite a while as well in the public, talking about a lot of important issues. And I think he's got a good voice and a way of like really putting things together that could be an interesting lens for people. So obviously we have some differences of opinion and some alignments of opinion. So this is going to be a great time for us to share like a nice brotherly chat and also see what we can do to bring people into this conversation out there as well. I'm happy to have you here. Thanks. And we're going to just unpack what does it mean to be a liberated man from the position of the psychology that we have been practicing.
It's an important question, isn't it? Many men that I know, since I work with them clinically, are not liberated. They are constrained, they're confined, they are frustrated, they are depressed, they're anxious, they're angry, they're resentful. Many of them have just basically checked out. And I think it's a tragedy because these men have tremendous potential. They are bright, they are caring, they are values driven, they are active athletically, they come from good families, they have strong educational backgrounds. They're actually quite sociable one-on-one in a safe space with people that they care about and trust, but they cannot liberate themselves in the larger social sphere, and specifically when it comes to interpersonal relationships with women.
Mm. Well, I think that's a great touch point to kind of drop in is that, there's a lot of potential and capability in masculinity and in individual men, and they sometimes just need to be supported and to have maybe some of that context and opportunity to either work with maybe cleaning up some of that damage that may have been there from things in the past, as well as maybe becoming more functional in ways that they don't know how to yet. And then also the possibility of moving towards some types of greater potential of optimization, what that might be as well. So having said that, let's have a little bit of a jump in on who you are and what you do quickly, just so people have a sense of what your background is and what your specialties are.
I'm trained as a clinical psychiatrist, an MD. My medical background was really more of a way for me to start working with people one-on-one to hear stories and to offer them counseling as opposed to a passion for medicine per se. And I've moved over the last 5 to 7 years very strongly into a non-medicinal treatment approach. Sleep, diet, exercise has always been my foundation, but more recently I've been recommending and exploring other forms of treatment. For example, ketamine is now very popular and very well received when it's done properly, emphasis on properly, to help treat depression and to develop insight into people's stuck points. I've also recommended a tremendous variety now of supplements and some quasi-supplements like mushrooms, non-psychedelic based treatments that are very available now in Los Angeles and the United States and also throughout the West. Again, always with safety and always with the goal in mind that this isn't a play space, this is a treatment zone. And I've always been very interested in therapy. I don't do a lot of therapy anymore. I do a lot more public speaking, writing. I feel like I can get more bang for my buck or bang for my hour that way. But I'm still very concerned about the relationship, about the story, about the conversation. And that's really why I went into psychiatry and why I'm still fascinated by it. I really enjoy people. I enjoy their stories. And I believe I have a skill set that allows me to take the micro, which is the unique story of each individual, and speak about it to the group on the macro and take lessons from it and allow the macro to learn from the micro and then bring it home and improve themselves. And I think that's something that I do well and I enjoy doing.
No, I appreciate that. And as people know, you know, I've been in this field of, let's say, transformation masculinity for a good couple of decades as well, and also looking at, you know, what does it mean to be a cultural transformative and assist people through these, like hoops, you know, these understanding points of themselves, as well as particularly in the field of like socializing, dating, relating. That was my primary frame, and in some ways still is. But I like to open up this larger conversation about, you know, what is a healthy archetype of masculinity? Because this is a big ongoing conversation. And also, how can we somewhat reinforce or restore or maybe supplement and augment masculinity in this modern time to be able to be more supported and secure in its nature? And I think this is a really important conversation. I think me and Mark understand this and have been sort of in an ongoing conversation for quite a while around what's going on here. And with that being said, like maybe we can jump in and you talk about some of the pain points that you see and maybe some of the insights that you've been having lately, and we can start looking at what we can do about it, if anything.
Well, I think what you bring to this conversation, the word culture, cannot be or I say overemphasized. Culture has, in my experience clinically and just in my personal life as I travel and as I meet people, culture has really become, in some ways, the primary driver of the mental health crisis in the United States. And this is very unfortunate because you can't change culture. We don't have any control over culture by definition. We can only find our way through it and redefine ourselves to help succeed and reach our potential as much as possible. And I think that the culture in the West has developed a lot of toxicity. And I see it in many ways, but in the area that I think we're interested in here, it really has to do with the interpersonal relationships, specifically those between men and women. And I am acutely aware and have been now for about 5 to 7 years, it's getting worse every year in my view, of the increasing unwellness of the American woman or the Western woman. And specifically, what I mean by that is the cluster B personality disorders. And what I want to focus on in that group really is narcissism and borderline personality disorder, or their traits. These are a constellation of symptoms they're subjective. It's hard to necessarily define the pure case for each one of these disorders, and it doesn't really matter because they're descriptive,
Hmm.
but they exist, and you can sense them, you can feel them, you can describe them in individual encounters with specific people. And I see these traits on the rise here in Los Angeles and throughout the Western world. And it's an important problem for men because men have to interact with these women on their path to achieving masculinity. And unfortunately, if men are not aware of them, or they're not able to define them or see them or deal with them in a healthy way, their masculinity can become compromised, and they can become unfairly, towards themselves, unfairly handicapped. They can handicap themselves on their path and can create a sort of false belief system, a delusional system of definition of themselves that is inaccurate, by allowing themselves to be defined through their interpersonal relationships with unhealthy women who have unhealthy personality types. And that's
Mm.
what I find to be the biggest cultural problem right now in my practice and in the people that I interact with.
That's a fascinating angle to bring into this conversation. And if we just like put that on the side for a second, because I think that's a great thing to circle around. Obviously a broader thing in just general human, let's say, relating, which is our own, you know, personal attachment styles, and obviously men and women both have their different ways of interacting with the world. And I think that there's like sort of healthy formations of personality versus more maladaptive, which, you know, not so healthy ways of doing things over time that catch up on both sides. But I understand what you're talking about with this sort of tension of pressure that's showing up in culture because of, I guess, more of a polarization in the masculine feminine dynamics around, uh, like I guess some senses of entitlement and some senses of egocentric types of behaviors that have, I think, in some sense, been somewhat exacerbated and maybe turned into like a kind of a meritocracy thanks to social media and the way in which like the culture has tended to trend towards this kind of elitist hedonism, kind of pleasure seeking, self-validating thing, which I think if we look at it from a larger perspective, and this goes for both men and women to a degree, I think that's kind of an immature take on reality, right? It's like a sort of an early stage development of a healthy ego. And if we were to take this type of entitlement or that type of way of interacting socially back into history not so long ago, it probably would have been shunned and rejected pretty hard by the people around it at the time, unless you were part of some small group of elites or something that were allowed to be kind of shrouded. So I think it's an interesting manifestation of, let's say, materialism and maybe even some sort of unhealthy side effect of corporate kind of mind control that's taken place, that then ends up having this kind of infectious, join our cult of egocentric kind of narcissism vibe that tends to take place. And of course, it's pretty hard, and I'm interested to hear what you got to say. It's pretty hard to put your finger on, like, where's the beginning or the end of that? Because, personally, like, I'm a believer in women's rights, but at what point does that become an issue that women are maybe not getting what they really want from those rights, or that becomes then a competition over something else, and then it becomes almost like a fragmentation of the society that is trying to create equilibrium, actually then becoming disequilibrated by various, like, power games or situations of entitlement. So that's not to take sides, but just to try to be objective here, right? Is looking at, like, what's really going on here and how is it affecting individuals? Because from my perspective as a men's coach, one of the first things and most important things that I do is try to understand the personality of the man that I'm working with. Where's he coming from? What's his issues? Where's he going? What does he desire? How can I help him? And in many ways, this is often, very heavily, uh, let's say, geared towards, like, emotional inhibition, or some types of, like, abandonment anxieties and fears. Obviously, there's all kinds of, like, mixes of other things that can happen in there. A lot of self-sacrificing men, for example. So you can tend to see, like, those types of patterns then create more of these, like, nice guy types of behaviors. And then some people might say, oh, that's like, this tendency to want to give too much to women, or to let them get away with too much, or even simping kind of thing that people fall into when they look at this culturally. And then, of course, you've got some of this other kind of counterbalance that we're talking about showing up in the female population to a degree as well. So ultimately, I think it's just an interesting frame to start to look at things, not to pathologize it or even to necessarily to judge it, but just to try to be, like, objective and clear about understanding the patterns. So maybe then there can be a remedy, there can be a change in philosophy, or at least an awareness about healthy boundaries, healthy communication, healthy understanding, and guarding against, things that could be avoidable with the right types of understanding.
Well, look at it this way, perhaps. If a woman isn't clear about what her femininity is and where it's derived from, that leads to different but equally painful and damaging problems for her, and obviously for her interpersonal relationships with other women and with men, as it is for a man to not be able to accurately, clearly define what the masculine is and how to
Mhm,
grow and express it in himself, which then leads to the same kind of interpersonal problems that the
mhm,
woman is having, but instead from the other direction. So
mhm,
if both sexes have been fed lies, cultural lies,
mhm,
about where their femininity and where their masculinity derives from, how it's defined, how to cultivate it, how to express it, how to reach their potential as individuals and as interpersonal counterparts in this world of social world that we live in. And we are
mhm,
social creatures. And we talked about this once before. You cannot, in my opinion, you cannot achieve your potential as a solitary creature, as a human. It's not
mhm,
possible. If this is the case, if this is true, then what needs to be done is we need to re-clarify, redefine what these traits are in men and women that are truly masculine and feminine, and learn to cultivate them and pull away some of the cultural judgments and shame that have been attached to them. As an example, I really like the core definitional attribute system from the Way of Men, of masculinity being essentially physical strength, courage, honor, and mastery. I love that schema. It's not perfect, but I think it's pretty darn good. And when expressing those traits and developing them becomes shameful, becomes laden with judgment, becomes toxic, the popular word toxic masculinity, which I think is a misnomer completely, then men will pull away from those traits. They will not develop themselves physically. They will not show courage. They will not express honor, and they will not master skills. And if they don't do those things, they will not be attractive to other men. They will not feel good about themselves, and they will not be attractive to women. And the same thing goes on the female side. If femininity is defined truly more by receptivity, softness, being emotionally attuned, offering a sense of nurturing, which is what motherdom is, and being a parent, and in relation to men, submitting, surrendering to a man in the context of safety, of course, but surrendering to a man so that that feminine flower can blossom and grow under the sunlight or the shadow, so to speak, of the man, then I believe both sexes can better themselves and then can interact with each other on a better level that's not toxic. This is not happening, Shae. The opposite is happening right now culturally. And this is what gets me so impassioned. I see so much loss of potential for men and women because they are not seeing and defining these traits accurately in themselves, and therefore are being impeded in their growth and are therefore developing some of these toxic personality traits reinforced by social media and other sources like egocentrism, like entitlement, which is a horrible, horrible quality when it's too powerful in an individual and blocks the connection point between the man and the woman.
Mm. Yeah, excellent points. And like obviously there are a lot of negative side effects on both sides, right? So both sides are getting broken down and kind of hurt by this in the larger scheme of things. And like it brings a number of things to my mind. So as I was thinking about what you said, I was thinking, well, there is this ancient principle of polarity. There's an ancient principle of unity of opposites, which is a clearly observable scientific fact of reality. And it's not to say that, you know, we're going to now devise everything into like a man and a woman or something, but it is interesting to look at things as like unified by difference and having contrastive complements. And this is, like I said, it's an ancient law that's been observed for, you know, aeons, probably even pre-written history as an understanding of some duality. Now, the ability to be able to understand how that polarity is, in some sense, then expressed as a law of gender, let's say, like the qualities of a masculine or a fatherly or a feminine or a sort of motherly quality, can then start to create like a very powerful contrasting spectrum of healthy reality possibilities, because we don't just live in one unity of things. And even if there is such a thing as a one unity, which I do believe in non-duality, and I have experienced non-duality, but that is also something that is both transcendent and inclusive of opposites in some sense. It's a sort of a non-divisive duality, but still allows it duality to exist within it, because, you know, just because you see God doesn't mean that you cease to see all things. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite.
It's not the severing of the endpoints to get to the center. It's the inclusion of those to get to the center. And that's a very important difference. What I see now in culture, in this false inclusiveness, as it's called, is actually an elimination of everything. If you look at it from a number line, from the right of zero and the left of zero. And if you eliminate everything, you wind up with nothing. You wind up with zero, which is non-conflictual. It doesn't create tension. It feels comfortable, but it's absent. It's empty. What you're describing is actually the inverse of that. It's not polarization, but it's taking the polars and pulling them together to create something that is completely inclusive. That's very different than what we're being, in my view, what we're being taught or indoctrinated to swallow today.
No, I appreciate that. And it's interesting because what that also leads me to is a sort of a stack of things, actually. So the other thing is that, you know, there is such a thing as like immature, mature in a way. Not to once again put judgment on immature versus mature, but looking at it as in there's certain states and stages of development of understanding of things. And we could, you know, broadly class like masculine and feminine as both, you know, in immature and mature capability stages. So let's say an immature masculine and we know what it is when we see it. We can feel it. Like immature masculine is usually very grandiose, very like, self-centric. Also, a lot about competition, a lot about let's say bravado, and a lot of externalization of power, and trying to be like somebody who's getting some sense of validation through proving and competition, which is not, once again, all bad, but in some sense, if that's the entirety of their existence, then that can become somewhat of a stifled way of looking at things. Then there's many other shadow aspects of the immaturity, well, which might be the collapse of those things, the inability to compete, the sort of the failure to launch, the inability to have strength, the inability to have like some, let's say, structure, could be part of the immature masculine sort of domain, let's say. And then you've got the healthy masculine domain. So the healthy masculine domain maybe leans more towards these qualities of things like creating safety, stability, security, protection, provision, and also having more of a sort of a sense of like community holding or almost kingship. So it's like a sense of like selfless selfhood, in the sense of not self-sacrifice as much as there is an aspect of self-sacrifice in it, but as a matter of fact, it's more like the self becomes like so capable it's able to hold more units than itself. It can hold others in its field, and that's like a more of a masculine, powerful force, whether that's a father or someone who can be a leader, or maybe even someone who can command and hold like large groups. Uh, and then with the feminine aspect, we end up with this kind of more immature, once again, self-centric, more sort of, let's say, sexualized currency of power, and the sense of like trying to manipulate the world through the power of her, let's say, feminine influence, mostly through relationship manipulation, and using that as her kind of primary currency of validation in the world. So see me, notice me, tell me I'm good, like this kind of wanting to be powerful and validated because of the fact that they have some type of sexual currency. And then, of course, there's the shadow of that of failure to have that too, for whatever reason, whether they don't, where some women might not have the metrics of whatever culture or society says they're supposed to have to be in that range of being, like, in the sexual marketplace in certain ways, just the same as men have that same problem of not reaching certain, like, whatever standards, projected standards. And then on the opposite side, we have like mature femininity, which is much more about being able to be capable of nourishing, holding, supporting, and this motherly power, which ultimately is like a superpower. And that's something that I think, for example, I'm in Eastern Europe and spend a lot of time in these kind of Eastern European cultures, mostly because, it's just a different way of looking at things to a degree, a little bit more grounded in maybe more traditionalism to a degree. And in some sense, like the feminine nature is often much more honored and taken care of in some more cultural, transformative, or cultural, traditional kind of honorable way. So it's not uncommon, for example, to have grandmas and mums teaching their daughters how to sew and how to cook and how to have these kind of, let's say, feminine skills. Now that sounds like it could be like sexist from a modern Western perspective. Like, why should a woman be interested in those topics if maybe she wants to go out and make money and have authority and kick ass in the corporate hierarchy or whatever she wants to do, which is, once again, no judgment, but the fact that those arts are being preserved to a degree is a polarity and is a powerful thing, especially the same as like, a man still being taught to be able to go out and maybe do bushcraft, or how to build something with his hands, or how to understand how to be a guy who takes care of his body physically, for example. Like, these are, traits that I think are capability sets, that once we have those capability sets, they do help to fortify and clarify like the types of values and then identities that come with those capability sets. And generally, it's an interesting correlation to see that, like, if we do start to have a sort of an awareness of what the masculine feminine polarity is in some general, like, universal truth, and we do start to see the tendency of the spectrum of immature to mature in the chain of development, and then we do start to see, that there are capability layers that can be put into this dynamic, then it actually solves a lot of this meaning crisis that people are up against. Because in a traditional context, most of that meaning crisis that we seem to face in our modern Western world was kind of taken care of by the fact that you would be in a harsh condition, and the conditions would dictate that if you're a man, you'd have to be strong, go out into the wild, do heavy kind of masculine stuff, and you probably do it with other men that were capable, and then that would make you a valuable member of the whatever, the culture, the place, the people. And also women were also valued to some degree by their ability to have nurturing and caring and, some type of like home creating kind of space caring capabilities as well. Now, once again, that's not, and I'm all for, people having ranges of masculine, feminine behaviors and experiences inside of themselves, etc. And I think it's healthy that we have more of a broader range of those things and that men have more feminine kinds of experiences of possibilities and women have more masculine range of capabilities. But ultimately, there is this sort of natural essence, I think, that the species is kind of attuned to. And if we don't pay attention to that and work with that, then we do experience the side effects of that. We do experience the symptoms and the signs and the problems just the same as, if we malnourish ourselves with bad food or live sedentary lifestyles and, do things that are not good for us physically, then we're going to experience a type of like deterioration of condition because just the basis of nourishment is not being sort of kept in order. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'd love to hear what you got to say next, is that one of the ways that I have been dealing with this or learning about this, which has been a long road, to be honest, like I said, decades of exploring philosophies all around the world and also developing through Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, looking at a lot of different ideas around psychology, communication, this whole dating and relating field, etc. So a big deep dive for a long time. And the stuff that I've been finding has been very helpful is actually coming back to almost like a type of like consciousness first work, which I think is ultimately what this idealistic kind of like equality kind of thinking is actually trying to express, but it gets all distorted in its own kind of ideology and then forgets that it's just a blueprint if it's talking about it without embodiment. So if we come back to the base of like consciousness first, so we're having a conscious experience, that is the actual context of existence. And then within that, then we have some ranges of different types of focus. And if we pay attention, our focuses are things like hot, cold, or feeling contracted or feeling expanded, or, feeling like we are being received or feeling like we're expressing. So we start to see, okay, well, the world and the nervous system, I think, evolves and understands the world through contrast. So therefore, polarity is almost like the foundation construct of orientation of not only self, but perception. So perception itself and self as a side effect. So then if we keep building on that, because I think we build this so amazingly and we're so sophisticated in our capabilities to naturally do this, that we kind of go blind to it until it gets kind of brought to our attention. And this is also something that, I could say traditional or ancient kind of cultures were really good at trying to bring into the front of mind, like to symbolize and to have almost like this mythopoetic kind of reinforcement of this like truth narrative of what does it mean to exist as a consciousness in relationship to things and polarities of things, and to also have various forms of extremes, which then brings in this kind of like, mythologies, hero mythologies, or going through journeys and having to grow through like initiatory kind of processes, which once again, I think we lose because we tend to look at it more as like some type of like feel good story abstract that we watch in Star Wars or something. But we forget that like that journey of consciousness exploring itself in reality and learning to know itself as different feelings and knowings and relationships is really actually like the most important like feature of existing. And once we kind of put that into a kind of a box in a way of like, oh, that's like, that is the mastery, that's the path, that's the way that we start to put this together, we can chop and change it and ideologically like, repackage it in infinite ways. But it has this kind of core sort of, meta process that's going on in the midst of that. So as we get back to our consciousness, we get back to our feelings, we get back to our bodies, and then we get back to what does it mean to have a loving, nourishing feeling in our bodies first, because I think we could all use that. And to also get to feel like, well, in some sense, that's a feminine quality. It's a watery quality. It's a yin quality. It's a goddess representation of reality, as opposed to then having like this more intent driven, sharp, directed, angular, doing things, saying things, making things, manipulating things, which tends to be more fiery, more of this kind of like, knife kind of sharpness that's cutting through things in a way that has a masculine quality. And once again, we are composed of both those things, the sharpness of intent as well as the softness of the surrender of our perception or our consciousness. And in a way, I think if we're paying attention to what we are and how we work, those masculine, feminine things are actually intrinsically part of us. And I know myself that my nervous system has gained great capability and strength and resilience by bringing those qualities into it, even without the external of a culture or another woman or anything or a relationship. So that's something that I think is an interesting thing to bring into the conversation, which is really about like almost like the solo journey of consciousness, but then the way in which that is part of like a larger story of maturity and initiation and transformation, and then understanding who we are in actual reality. Because ultimately, when we put all that into a kind of a story, then there is this type of hero's journey where, and I myself, I've been on this path for a long time, have been a big believer that the way in which I get what I want, the most egocentric thing that I can do is actually take care of other people and fix the world as much as possible, because then I'm actually upgrading the system, because then I have a more of a safety net of not only having a safer world or a better interrelational type of world, I'm building a positive meritocracy of growth and maturity and favors and goodwill and higher currencies, that is something that's hopefully more sustainable. So that's also a big part of what I like to bring into this space of conversation.
Well, isn't mythology, Shae, always grounded in the embodiment of the individual vis-a-vis the world? It's not ethereal. Mythology is always very concrete. It's always very sensorial. It's always very sensual. It's always very driven on its core level by doing, even though there may be a larger purpose to it and there may be a greater effect than just what's benefiting that individual hero. Otherwise, it's meaningless. It doesn't have any value. It's pure egocentricity, and it doesn't allow for growth. I I remember hearing from a preschool teacher when I was a teenager, it's decades ago, who is a big, big hippie. She's American, but married an Indian man because she was really into the 60s, 70s hippie culture and drugs and free love. And she was the quintessential sort of lefty liberal political type when I was growing up. And she believed in killing what she called the cultural indoctrination of masculine and feminine by, in her view and in her practice, by giving the opposite sex toys to the children. So, for example, she would give dolls to the boys to play with, and then she would give fire engines and trucks and cars to the girls. And to her credit, she acknowledged that it was a complete and total failure.
Mm.
She said the girls would take the cars and trucks and they would fill them with little flowers and they would have tea parties in the cars. And the men would take the dolls and they would rip the heads off the dolls and they would start throwing them around like baseballs. So the aggression, the violence, the competition would be expressed in the boys, and the girls would express what they always want to express, which is communion with others, conversation, receptivity, beauty. They just used the toys to express what they were going to do anyway with the other toys that were taken from them. And so she had to acknowledge that there's an inherent dichotomy between the male and the female. There's a difference in the expression of it. And again, as you just said, it doesn't mean that men cannot be feminine and women cannot be masculine. That's not at all what we're saying, obviously. But what we're saying is that there is an inherent bipolarity, and that bipolarity is expressed through these quests, these actions, these pursuits, these, you said, kind of taking the mythology and bringing it down to the individual level and doing it in one's life. And I think we talked about this before, that the taking over of our mythology, of our actions, of our sensorial world by the virtual, by the social media, and suppressing that embodiment way of consciousness and then taking our consciousness and acting on it in the world has really messed us up. All of those traits that you described that men have for eons expressed and cultivated, the hunting, the gathering, the protecting, building fires. Those traits and qualities were not meant to burnish just the ego of the man. They were meant to provide and provide for other men and for women and for the children.
Mm,
And the women that you described who in Eastern Europe are still learning from grandma how to sew, how to cook, those traits are not meant to allow that woman to be the most popular woman in the town because she's the best sewer. They're meant to help provide for the family and for the man, the husband, and the children, to provide something warm, clothing,
mm,
to provide sustenance, nourishment, food, that of course men can also do, but they don't do it intrinsically. 99% of men do the opposite. They want to go out and kill to get food that the woman can then cook. They want to wear the clothing that the woman makes. They don't want to make their own clothing. They want to go
mm,
out and hunt. They want to build fires, which consume energy, but also produce tremendous transformation. Women don't want to be involved with fires. It's dangerous. It's scary,
mm,
but they'll
mm,
cook over the fire. These are all dichotomous but complementary traits. And I don't believe that to support them in mythology and consciousness and embodiment and practice is in any way to constrain the feminine or the masculine or their roles, or to burden one sex or the other with some form of obligation which doesn't fit with their nature, or to reduce their freedom, or to counter their liberation. I think that to be intellectually honest and honest with history, we have to acknowledge that in general, societal human growth occurs by not just acknowledging, but by honoring those differences that are intrinsic. There's something non-political, something non-cultural. It's even pre-biologic. It may be archetypal or mythological that drives men and women to naturally pursue these skill sets with their hands, with their bodies, to become better, and then to offer them to the other with pride and with generosity, so that the sexes can come together and the families can grow and build, and we can create these tribes. And I
mm.
think we've lost that. I think we've been ideologically indoctrinated to fight against it by, call it evil, dark forces, something. And I think we're all suffering. All of us are suffering from that have not understood that and are not clear on what's happening.
Yeah. Well, I think there's an interesting phenomenon that I think happens when individuals and when an individual, particularly when groups of individuals get into alignment with healthy being, and they become much more resilient to negative desires. They become much more capable of handling and harnessing their attention. And that makes them a lot less vulnerable to manipulation and a lot less vulnerable to value extraction. So it's something to consider that over time, if the basic metric in meritocracy is profit of people's attention and value extraction, then we slowly start to see this kind of like this corporate feature creep that's always like trying to give a new thing that's going to take a little bit more to get a little bit more. And therefore, in the service of desire, we can fall into the trap of starting to become a kind of pleasure junkie that's seeking something that is giving something that we didn't realize we're losing. So I think over time, what has slowly happened in our culture, because I think about this often, and I practice this practice, and I have to practice it constantly, but I practice this practice of coming back into my body and trying to actively feel the presence of my body on a consistent basis. And there's different flavors and ways of doing this, and it can become quite an esoteric practice, actually. But ultimately, it's very practical of just feeling like if I feel my hands, I'm occupying my hands with the sense. And not only can I move them as like kind of these meat hands that I'm feeling, I can also like hold them sort of in a static and then understand that there's a certain type of field or presence or nature of beingness to the hands. And that experience, we could say it's like the presence of the hands or the consciousness inside the hands is then some type of like experience of like a relationship of handing. I'm handing my presence. But then I can also move that into like a smile or a chest space or a breathing intent. So there's all types of different ways that I can actually package my focus types of presence in the body. And if I'm really honest with myself, this is a moment to moment experience that only ever exists now. I can fall into the trap that I've done this before, or that Eckhart Tolle talked about this, or this is what, some guru says you should do, or this is a nice thing because it makes you relaxed and you make more money when you're relaxed or whatever. But that's not the point. The point is I'm actually experiencing something that's intrinsically valuable in and of itself in the moment because I am it. And it is intrinsic and sovereign and beyond all measure of any value that can be contained or trademarked or controlled or politicized or polarized. And in many ways, it is undivisive and completely protected from, the chaos and misery of the world. And that's the beauty of actually being with the presence of the moment. It's something that is emergent. It's something that is forever here. And it's something that even if we're in the face of horror or death, is actually both transcendent and immanent of this type of limits of the human condition. Now, that's a pretty tricky thing to pay attention to whilst we've got all these flashy gadgets and shiny objects and also all these offers being given to us about you should this and you could this and we could this. And therefore, why are you focusing on your body? Why do you care about your subtle sensations? Why do you care about this thing, especially when it's not honored, right? If we were born into a culture where from a young age we were taught, guard your attention like your life depends on it. Make sure you pay attention to every breath like it might be your last. Have value on the things and the intrinsic relationships that you have as if they're more valuable than any gold, because they are the things that are going to carry with you and the only things that you truly have from moment to moment. Then we would have a completely different situation, a completely different value set, a completely different set of identities. Now, the interesting thing is that this is creeping into society in a good way. I mean, I think popular culture and popular opinion is slowly picking up this memes and this understanding of attention in various ways, whether it be mindfulness. And as you said, I mean, you're part of it in a way, a positive psychology movement, movement towards holistic health and well-being, this kind of upward spiral dynamic of like taking care of ourselves in a way where we are not going to be victims of unconsciousness and we will take more sovereign power over our natures. And once again, that's not an easy sort of opinion to put out there into the masses sometimes, but I think it is an opinion that's become more, let's say, culturally indoctrinated over time. But the challenge still is, and this is even myself included, that if we don't pay attention, then we can easily fall into the trap that we're doing something that we think is like another solution, but we actually turn it into another type of artifact that's like I guess a piece of poisoned reality that has been then collected and kind of consumed by our egocentrism to want to possess and own and know and be like the master of things because we want to get validated by it. So that's a tricky thing to say, but the practice is to be in the body and to feel and to be as present as possible, and ultimately to develop like a living actual relationship with reality as, a being first, a consciousness first. And then you can have thoughts and you can have ideologies and you can do your busy work and you can get into actions and you can have your different, what I call vectors of trajectory that you're working on. Yet at the same time, there's something that's more intrinsic that we're operating from as well, like a kind of a base currency or a sort of a quantum field of technology, let's say, that's like is actually our core nature. So it's a tricky thing to talk about sometimes, but I think as soon as we start engaging with it, and this is a big thing I do with my coaching, is I work with, a lot of powerful people and they have a lot of capabilities, and I just take them into this first. It's one of the first stations that we want to start to work with. Get to the body, get to the awareness, claim attention, and then see what happens as we start to build a philosophy of attention first, and self-ownership over attention, and in some ways starting to establish this relationship as a kind of soulful, sovereign, power and authority of selfhood, and then working how we can do things in the world as a result of that. And then that could then translate into some type of expression as, okay, now I'm self-aware of my narratives. Now I'm going to choose if I want to get into this thing or not get into this thing. And I know, because I do have to do it myself, you have to be relentless with it. You have to be relentless. And if you hang out with any good teachers, I'm sure you've done your own work too. If you're really going to be good at something, you have to be relentless, far and beyond whatever your ego says is comfortable. And then as you get into this processes of being in the body, feeling, paying attention, basically cutting away the things that are not the not the consciousness, and just allowing yourself to be both able to create narratives, but not being caught up in those types of narratives. And that's, a base level of groundedness. That's presence. And in some sense, presence is authority. Authority is leadership. It is literally like the source of kingship. This is king powers. And everybody has them. And every man can be like a possessor of a throne, but he has to take the invitation. He has to go on that journey. He has to learn how to become capable of acting and operating as some king-like being. And that's not always a journey of perfection, and it's not always a journey of pleasure, and in many ways, it's not even a journey of reward in any, let's say, extrinsic kind of like world benefits in a direct way, even though there can be a lot of positive side effects. So I think it's important to sort of put that into some context of base, so that then things can make sense. But I also get, like, and this is the last thing I'll say because I know I'm on a bit of a rant here, is that the idea that we have this such easy attention grabbing experiences that we can find ourselves almost like on a psychedelic trip without even realizing it. It's like, it's so easy to just like be in the next dopamine thing, the next shiny object, the next funny video, the next app, the next video, the next query, the next piece of information. And just, once again, constantly moving from one abstract to another, and letting them all kind of constantly crawl through our experience. And before you know it, you don't even know that you're having an embodied experience. You're having this kind of very big virtual reality type of thing, this simulation kind of projection of your own mind's sort of exploration. And how much of that is healthy, and at what point does that become sort of somewhat psychotic, and at what point does that become mass psychotic, right? That's an open question that we're kind of exploring here as well.
Well, that's exactly what I think has happened to our society and our culture, is that there's been a mass delusional psychosis that's taken over. And there are individuals at specific times who can pull out of that. But as far as a mass movement, I think that there has been a kind of uh, a layering, like a cloud just sort of falling over the society that has had their attention completely stolen from them through these devices in our pockets and billboards and uh, online videos. That there's no way without, as you said, someone being relentless to disconnect from that to a large degree. You notice it the most when you do what you're suggesting, which is to go back to a sense of personal groundedness and embodiment. Feel that starting with your own body, and then extend that out into your interactions with your environment, especially with people. If I think about some of the most moving and powerful experiences that I've had that are very simple, they would be things like when I'm feeling that I have disconnected from all those intrusions, and I'm certainly victim to it myself. I get pulled away for hours at a time, and then I realize, it's kind of snapping out of it. My God, what just happened to me? I left. I went on a trip,
Mm.
and it wasn't to my benefit in most cases. But when I'm able to disconnect from that, I'll say, for example, I'll be sitting at a cafe with a woman that I'm interested in, and we're not even talking, and we're just sitting there, just looking at what's happening around us out in the environment, and we're noticing each other and our energy, and we're not doing anything. We're just existing, and we're both centered, we're both grounded, we're both noticing very, very small changes in our body posture, in our face, and our smile. And we'll maybe just touch each other's hand briefly. And there's a sense of intimacy and sensuality and connection and meaning. That's the bigger word, meaning in that small moment than there would be in saying having a drug fueled sexual experience, which is
Mm-hmm.
just like another trip, and there's no connection. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of movement and action, but there's really no meaning in it, and it just sort of flutters away afterwards. And these are simple things that are very hard to achieve without being, as you said, relentless. And I think they were easier to achieve years and years ago because we didn't have the competition for our attention. We didn't have the drug dealer offering us yet another tab to go on another trip. So we didn't have the option of going down that path. We were almost guardrailed, into the embodied experience.
Mm.
And now we're not. So it has to be almost like a task now for us. It has to be like a gym workout. It has to be something that we make part of our day-to-day routine and that we're conscious of, because if we don't, and my patients are in this boat, they will most likely get pulled off into the recurrent virtual trip seeking way of living and become so disconnected from themselves and from others that they develop a they embody an emptiness and a lack of aliveness, which is despair. I can't overemphasize that. I feel that there's a lot of despair out there right now and a lot of complete disconnection because they've turned into the devices in the virtual life. And it's not doing us any good. It's separating the sexes, it's separating the tribes and the families. Um, and I want it to change. And as you are, I'm trying to do what I can to shift the culture because I want to be in a culture and a society which is life-giving and healthy just as much as you do.
Mm. So it's all great points, and I think in some sense then it has to come back to some groundedness of action too. So what can we do in the face of a lot of this? So obviously there's this fundamentals of where we can direct attention back. We can start to be aware of the value of our attention. Maybe we can start to realize that there is like value in like having relationships with specific things and polarities, and maybe having a sort of a unification of opposites as well as a contrast of comparatives that can have some type of tensions, and that's okay. So all these sort of fundamentals in place. But then what about practically? So for example, is there value in doing things like going out and meeting women anymore? And how does that look? And what are we going to do with that in terms of like how that can be a healthy thing? And I think there is value in that. It can be somewhat of a journey of individual adversity sometimes. And I think that's maybe somewhat always been a little bit of the case. Like it's not always easy to go out and find great love or have the love of your life just land in your lap, as much as we like to fantasize about that. And in many ways, I think we've been kind of sold a romantic fantasy about that, which is another kind of like, painkiller of mainstream society, that, we could just be some lovable loser that then finds the pretty, prom queen or whatever that likes us because we have some cool feature or whatever. And then all of a sudden our problems go away. That seemed to be something that was quite popular in the 80s and the 90s. Um, and I
Notting
think
Hill, Hugh Grant, those sort of
yes.
silly movies where they drop a book in a library and they pick it up and they realize, oh, I love the same book, and then in an hour and a half they're married and they're having children, and it's not very reality based.
Exactly. So with that being said, I mean, let's maybe drop in for this last sort of bit of this talk here, and let's see if we can get practical. Like, what in your view, like, what's the practicalities of these things, and obviously working around these realities of men's needs, and both in the aspects that are quite difficult, as well as the things that are bringing resources and goodness. Like, what do you see is something that men can do or understand that will help them?
A couple of things that come to mind immediately are the foundations of re-embodiment in the body, the physical body, through some form. I practice somatic, some form of meditation on a daily basis, at least 10 minutes a day, first thing that you do in the morning, preferably outside and in sunlight if you have access to it. Not we all do year round. I have done that now for a number of years, and I find that to be absolutely critical to having any shot at creating a continuous sense of embodiment and consciousness throughout the day. And if I skip that, I find it almost impossible for me to get back on my game. And I recommend that to all of my patients, every single one. For men specifically, I also believe that it's not only helpful, I believe it's probably critical to have a men's group that you can spend time with on a regular basis, preferably in person. And if not, at least through phone calls or video calls, where you can express masculinity and also challenges to it and support one another in this path towards growth. I don't believe today that a man can succeed on this path by himself. I don't believe it's possible. We don't have the infrastructure anymore that allows for that. We don't have native tribes. We don't have even family structures, except perhaps in certain places in Eastern Europe, you might have this continuity vertical structure. In most places in the West, we're too flattened, we're too horizontal. People are too hyper individualized now, hyper free to pursue everything that they want. And for that reason, they don't know what to pursue. They're overwhelmed with choices. And it leads to a shutdown and then an interior turning in, I believe, to a virtual life, which of course gets back to what we were talking about earlier, and that's a path towards despair. So I think that forming and finding a group of other men who share this goal consciously and are willing to sacrifice and work on it is absolutely critical. Those are two things that I strongly believe in and have seen results in as a starting point to go down this path.
Mm. No, that's really good. And I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think one of the biggest and most powerful things that people can do to get a big shift in their life is actually just join some type of community or a club. That in itself is probably one of the biggest needle moving, transformative things that anybody can do. Maybe better than, any type of psychedelic adventures or, some type of, pursuits of excellence on many different levels. It's just, join a club and have people to talk to and have things to do together. And then you can maybe network. And of course, all those other adventures, whether they're psychedelic or not, might happen as a side effect. So also, the embodiment aspect, I think, is huge. And there's a certain level of, any embodiment's better than no embodiment. And being in, popular kind of embodiment, let's say, tracks of going to the gym or doing like physical things, doing martial arts, I think can be great. And that's, a bit of that's why things like maybe jujitsu can be so good for guys, right? Like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu thing, it gives a bit of a brotherhood, a hierarchy, a physical thing, a bit of a context, somewhat of a mythology, for example. And there could also be, some type of like deeper inner embodiment practices as well. I think there's a lot of value that maybe gets misunderstood by guys, or they don't know how to find it, which is available when you do like internal physical arts. And a lot as a psychiatrist, I'm sure there's all these kind of like bioenergetics and body therapies, for example, like being able to move and express emotion through the body or have certain gestures. I think yoga in its true sense is that it's a way of like moving the body and unifying certain parts. And of course, there's also some of these kind of Westernish types of expression through the sense of embodiment as well, that could be like archetypal embodiment practices and having different types of experiences of almost invoking things through your embodied practices. So that could be a powerful opportunity for people to work with as well. And I think ultimately, this is about like getting a path of meaning back in order, some type of sense making practices. And that could mean, and for me, I mean, I have a lot of like content, and I can also relate to the fact that I very regularly go into very dense amounts of information. I'm experiencing overwhelming amounts of stuff. I'm doing a lot of research about cutting edge technology all the time and how I can improve and how I can understand what culture's up to. Because in some sense, man, I've always been a bit of a, canary in the coal mine trying to be ahead of the curve. And I think I am to a degree. But then at the same time, that means that I'm always in this vulnerable state of being a bit of a scout. So, being out there in that edge means that then I have to sort of look at like, well, what can I do to fortify and protect myself in that position as well? Which I think then comes back to working with those physical embodiment practices, working with breath regulating practices, nervous system regulating practices. And this is something that I know Mark knows about, but it's very important to, bring people into, some sense of fundamental containment with their healthy nervous systems. Because that's maybe the most important thing, because it's very difficult to do anything if your nervous system is dysregulated. And of course, there's a lot of great knowledge coming out about that these days, and that we're very lucky to be in this time. But now we have all the knowledge, and we have the science, and we have the reinforcement. It's very important to now start to mash that with that type of physical relentlessness, that type of like will that can now actually embody these opportunities of wisdom that are up for grabs. So I tend to agree. This idea of embodiment, this idea of community, very important aspects. And I would add that there is just this subtle element of then finding an effective methodology and philosophy within that. So there's a sort of subtlety within that, because we can go through the mechanics and the techniques, and I think that's also good to go through the explorations and research and development of mechanics and techniques. But ultimately we want to get into more strategic levels. It's like
Motivation alone is not going to get you across the finish line. Not that there's a
right.
finish line, but it's not going to keep you in the race, let's say. You need an actual support structure, and you need a system that will provide these benefits for you on a regular basis. Otherwise, the effort will eventually peter out because you're not going to see any return.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that being said, I mean, this is the intent that I'm putting forward here and rolling out here. It's like, this is a conversation. This is an ongoing, open-ended experience and brotherhood. I'm not saying that I'm a guru or have the answers, but I think that there is an opportunity to meet other men and to have this conversation and to come together into what I'm, putting out there as the liberated man and as the inner game. And I think that this is a great approach. And in many ways, it's been somewhat kind of forgotten or maybe overlooked, in the sense that people aren't necessarily focusing on some of these simple but very important things of focusing inside, being in the body, building good friendships, building community, and focusing on meritocracies of values that are not just, hustle and grind culture kind of thing. So with that being said, like if people are out there and they're resonating with this, if they feel the call and they want to really go down the rabbit hole of what's possible and explore their mind, explore their body, explore these philosophies and be part of a culture and a brotherhood, I mean, that's what I'm offering here. Individually and then also collectively, there's opportunities for that as well. And I'm not sure, how the future is going to be for all of us, but I also know that like it's going to be better if we collaborate and we be problem solvers and we work together as a team, as opposed to, trying to compete and, one up each other like some silverbacks, Mm.
That I completely 100% agree with, both philosophically and also from my own personal experience.
So with that said, thank you for being with us, Mark. Is there anything else you want to add here? Any shout outs or anything you want to round off with?
No, not right now. I think we covered some good subjects, and I think we ended on a good note, focusing on the need to gain that support, whether it's through a group, through a coach, and align yourself with a good system that works. And be, as you say, be relentless in your pursuit of it.
Excellent. So we heard it from the good doctor himself. So, and he's good at what he does. So, thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you guys on the other side. If you want to, leave them some comments below, make sure you like and subscribe and share the show with anybody that you think would gain value. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. And hopefully we'll have Mark back. What's up, ninjas? Thanks for watching the video. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this material so that I can keep on growing this amazing channel. And if you'd like to get the help that I can offer, I would like you to check out the link in the description. Go to my website and you will be able to find amazing limited time offers to help you to be able to break through and make the changes that you would really like to have in your life. Until then, this is the Shaman saying peace out. May all your dreams come true, and I'll see you guys on the other side.